You know, there's something about the feeling of freedom behind the wheel that stays with us, no matter how much time passes. I'm sure many of you remember the first time you learned to drive, the thrill of independence, the joy of being able to go wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted. Fast forward a few decades, and that same sense of freedom can feel just as exhilarating, right? But as we get older, something starts to change. Our bodies don't move quite as fast as they once did, and the road seems a little less forgiving. I know some of you are probably still driving at 75 or beyond. It's a part of life that feels so familiar, almost like second nature. But have you ever wondered whether it's still safe for you to be on the road? Maybe you've noticed small changes, a slower reaction time, or a little more effort to focus on the road. Maybe you're just not as confident anymore, but you're not sure if those feelings mean anything serious. The truth is, there are certain signs we can look out for that can help us make a smarter decision about when to stop driving. And that's what I want to talk about today. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at 5 signs that could mean it's time to stop driving. Now, before you start thinking, oh, that doesn't apply to me, I want you to know that this is about being honest with ourselves. It's not about shame or guilt. It's about making sure that we stay safe, both for ourselves and for others on the road. But don't worry, we're not here to tell you that it's time to stop right now. Instead, I want us to focus on recognizing the signs, so you can make an informed decision when the time comes. So let's get into it. Start with the first 2 signs that could point to a time for change. But before that, don't forget to subscribe for more tips and advice that can help you live your healthiest, happiest life. The first sign I want to talk about is this: difficulty with reaction time. Have you noticed that it takes you longer to respond to things on the road? Maybe someone cuts you off, or a pedestrian walks out in front of you, and you find yourself just a second too late to react. Now, I'm sure some of you might be thinking, I've been driving for decades. I've got this. But sometimes our reflexes aren't what they used to be. Our ability to process information, like what we see out of the corner of our eye or a sudden stop ahead, naturally slows down as we get older. It might seem like a small thing, but that extra moment can make all the difference between a close call and a serious accident. I remember talking to a friend of mine, Maria, who's in her early 80s. She had been driving for years and always felt in control. But one day, she was driving down the highway, and a car in front of her stopped abruptly. Maria didn't have the quick reflexes she used to, and she came close to rear-ending the car. Luckily, she was able to stop just in time, but the experience left her shaken. She told me later, it was like I could see what was happening, but my body didn't move fast enough. That was her wake-up call. It's not always obvious when this change happens. It can sneak up on us. But if you're noticing that your ability to react is slower than it used to be, it might be time to think about whether driving is still the safest choice. The second sign I want to mention is something I'm sure all of you can relate to: difficulty with vision. Over the years, our eyesight naturally changes. Some of us might find that we need reading glasses, or that things at a distance aren't as sharp as they once were. But it's not just the usual things that we notice. It's about our vision while we're driving. Do you sometimes find yourself straining to see street signs? Or maybe it's harder to notice vehicles coming from side streets. It can be particularly challenging at night when headlights from oncoming cars make everything feel blurry. I spoke to another friend, Alan, who's in his late 70s, and he told me something that really stuck with me. He said, I know I'm not seeing things the way I used to, but I keep telling myself it's not a big deal. Alan had been driving for years without issue, but lately, he started to notice that his night vision wasn't what it once was. He could still get around during the day, but when he had to drive at night, it felt like his eyes were no longer able to adjust quickly enough. He finally got his eyes checked and was prescribed new glasses, which helped him, but it also made him realize how easy it is to ignore small signs until they become bigger problems. It's important to be honest with ourselves about our vision. Things like glare sensitivity or difficulty judging distances can really impact our driving safety, especially when we're on unfamiliar roads. If you've noticed changes in your vision, even subtle ones, it's worth discussing with your doctor. Don't let it go unnoticed, because those small changes can add up and affect your ability to drive safely. I know this can be a tough conversation to have, but it's one that we need to approach with care and honesty. We want to continue living independently for as long as we can, and driving plays such a big part in that. But we also want to make sure we're doing so safely for ourselves and everyone else on the road. Have you noticed any changes like this recently? Maybe in your reaction time or your vision. If you have, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And remember, this isn't about judgment. It's about getting the right support, whether it's through getting new glasses or making a decision about when it's time to hang up the car keys. Now, I want to share another sign that could be telling you it might be time to reconsider driving, and this one's a little more personal. It's the feeling of losing confidence behind the wheel. Now, I know a lot of us are proud of our independence, and the idea of not driving anymore can feel like we're losing a big part of who we are. But what happens when that sense of confidence starts to slip away? Let me tell you about my friend Grace. Grace is in her late 70s, and for most of her life, she loved driving. It was something she did with ease, whether it was a quick trip to the grocery store or a weekend getaway. But a few months ago, Grace told me that she started feeling nervous every time she got behind the wheel. Simple tasks like merging into traffic or turning at busy intersections became overwhelming. At first, she brushed it off as a passing feeling, but it didn't go away. She'd start making excuses to avoid driving. I don't need to go to that store today. Or I'll just stay home instead of going out tonight. Eventually, Grace admitted that she wasn't sure if she was still capable of driving the way she once had. And that's exactly what happens. We all have those moments where doubt creeps in. Maybe it's after a small mistake on the road, or after something happens that makes us feel out of control. It's not unusual to feel less confident over time. After all, we've all had years of experience and countless memories driving, but the road itself doesn't stay the same. It changes. It gets busier, faster, and sometimes even a bit more dangerous. That can lead to a real sense of uncertainty. So if you find yourself hesitating, feeling anxious, or just not as sure about driving as you once were, it could be an important sign that it's time to think things over. I've heard many seniors share similar experiences, where they didn't feel like their driving was up to par anymore. It's not about the accidents you might have had. It's about how you feel behind the wheel. Sometimes, that mental shift can be one of the strongest indicators that it's time to make a change. And making that change doesn't mean you've lost something. It simply means you're adapting to a new chapter of your life. It's okay to step back and find other ways to get where you need to go. Which leads me to the next sign I want to talk about. Another one that's tied to our confidence. But in a different way, it's about changes in our physical abilities, like our strength and mobility. You'd be surprised how much these things affect our ability to drive. For example, have you ever noticed how much harder it is to turn your head quickly to check your blind spots? Or maybe your hands feel stiffer when gripping the steering wheel, and it's harder to control the vehicle? It's not just about strength in the usual sense. It's also about the small movements we make when driving, like reaching for the gear shift or turning the steering wheel. I remember when Paul, another friend of mine, mentioned that he was starting to struggle with getting in and out of his car. Paul's in his 80s, and he's always been a strong guy, but the last few years have been a little different. He noticed that his legs weren't as steady as they used to be, and sometimes when he'd get into his car, he'd have to take an extra moment to steady himself. It wasn't just about his ability to drive. It was the act of getting in and out of the car that had become challenging. And when we're physically not as agile as we once were, it can create a domino effect. It affects our ability to react in situations that require us to move quickly, like if we need to swerve or slam on the brakes. But it also changes how we interact with the car on a basic level. Even something as simple as holding the wheel firmly or turning around to back up. If you're noticing physical changes that make it harder to drive comfortably and confidently, it might be time to rethink whether driving is the best option for you. Think about it. How easy is it for you to make a quick stop or turn now compared to a few years ago? It's these subtle changes that can affect your overall safety on the road. If you're feeling less steady or finding it more difficult to physically control your vehicle, it might be a good idea to consider what's best for your long-term health. Before we go on, I want to remind you that all these signs are not meant to make you feel discouraged. Far from it. They're about giving you the tools to make informed, thoughtful decisions. If you're feeling these signs, It's important to remember that your health and well-being come first. And if you're unsure, you can always ask for a professional driving assessment to give you more peace of mind. Now, we've talked about some of the signs that can help us recognize when it might be time to stop driving. Signs like slower reaction times, vision changes, and shifts in confidence or physical ability. But there's one more sign that I think is worth discussing. It's something that tends to creep up gradually, and it's a little less obvious than the others. It's when you start avoiding driving altogether. Think about it. Are there times when you've been invited to go somewhere, maybe a family gathering or a day trip, and you found yourself making excuses to not drive? You might have started saying things like, "Oh, it's too far," or "I'll just stay home today," even though you used to love getting out of the house and going for a drive. Maybe you found yourself relying on others to take you places, or depending on public transportation, instead of getting behind the wheel. This avoidance can start as something small, skipping a drive to the store, passing on a trip to visit a friend. But over time, it can build up, and it's not just about being lazy or not wanting to go somewhere. It's about a subconscious shift, a growing reluctance to drive, because it feels a little too much to handle anymore. And that's when we really need to pay attention. I had a conversation with Carol, a woman in her early 80s, who shared that she used to love taking little weekend drives to the countryside. It was her thing. She'd get in the car, open the windows, and let the fresh air and the scenery lift her spirits. But recently, she realized she had started avoiding these trips. She kept making excuses. The roads are too busy today, or it's not worth the hassle. She knew something was off, but she didn't know if it was just a phase or something bigger. But after taking a hard look at how she felt when driving, she admitted she was becoming anxious about getting on the road. Now, I'm not saying that a little reluctance to drive every now and then is a big red flag, but if this becomes a recurring theme, if you find yourself avoiding driving more and more, it's worth exploring why. Is it because you're anxious? Do you feel overwhelmed by the idea of navigating busy streets? These feelings aren't something to brush aside. They can be a sign that your confidence and comfort behind the wheel have diminished, and that's an important thing to recognize. And I think this leads to the most important point of all. Recognizing when it might be time to stop driving is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of wisdom. It shows that you're paying attention to your body, your mind, and the changes that come with aging. It shows that you care about your safety, your family's peace of mind, and the well-being of everyone on the road. If you're noticing any of these signs, slower reactions, changes in vision, less confidence, or avoiding driving altogether, it's okay to take a step back and think about it. This doesn't mean the end of your independence. It might just mean that you're finding new ways to stay connected, to get around, and to continue living life on your terms, just in a different way. And let me remind you that none of these changes are set in stone. You can take steps to improve your reaction times, to get better glasses, or to practice mindfulness to help with your confidence. Just because you notice a sign doesn't mean you can't adapt or find solutions. It's all about being proactive and taking care of yourself. I hope this video has been helpful in giving you some things to think about. If you've noticed any of these signs in your own driving, I encourage you to talk to someone you trust about it. Sometimes a fresh perspective can make all the difference. And remember, it's never too late to make changes for the better. If you found this video helpful, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're still with me, just type the number 3 to let me know you're on board. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep having these important conversations about living your best life. It's not about the number of years you have left, but about making those years count. You've earned the right to live comfortably, safely, and confidently, no matter your age. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.